Well, good evening. On behalf of the board and staff at the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our fourth Aware for All Clinical Research Education event. My name is Lauren Mancourt, and I'm the Aware for All project manager for this event. I do see a lot of welcome and familiar faces, but a lot of new ones too, and I'm excited to have you join us. CISCRP, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, and I think CISCRP's a lot shorter to say than the Center for Information and the Study on Clinical Research Participation. Thank you for turning that up so I don't have to stand on my tippy toes. CISCRP was established in 2003, and the mission of our nonprofit is to educate people about the clinical research process, especially concerning your possible participation in clinical trials. Now, CISCRP, just to clarify things, doesn't conduct trials, and we don't directly recruit people for clinical trials. We do believe that there's a strong need for general education about the clinical trials process, especially the risks, the benefits, and the rights of people who participate in clinical trials. Now, these Aware for All events are something very near and dear to my heart. They're hosted throughout the country to help people make very informed decisions about whether or not to participate in trials and medical research. And you may wonder, why are studies important? Well, these are the primary vehicle through which people learn about medicine. You ever wondered, what's the premise for your doctor determining whether or not it's safe to give you an intervention, whether or not to give you some type of medicine when you're sick? Medical advances are achieved in the prevention, detection, and treatment of health problems. And these medical advances help us learn how to treat and manage diseases. They increase our life expectancies and improve our quality of life. And these are determined based on clinical trials. And these trials aren't possible without volunteers like you and me. Last year, more than 2 million Americans participated in over 80,000 clinical trials. I'm just curious. I know the room isn't full yet, but by a show of hands, how many of you out there have participated in clinical trials and studies? It's a lot of us. That's great. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you, because without you, my doctor wouldn't know what to do with me when I'm sick, wouldn't know how to take care of my children, wouldn't know whether or not it's safe to even give them a flu vaccine every year. And at the end of this event, we're going to thank each and every one of you who've ever participated for a clinical trial, so please do stick around. To make sure this program and Aware is the best educational experience for each of you, we're going to need your feedback. So we have 2 confidential surveys for you to complete. When you got here and either registered or signed in at the front desk, they should have given you a survey and a little raffle ticket. So, if you will, go ahead and take out your survey and raffle ticket. Okay? If you need a survey and you didn't get one, go ahead and hold up your hand. There's some volunteers that should be walking around the room. Volunteers, go ahead and stand up if you don't mind. We've got a volunteer right here. Okay? And volunteers, if you will, go ahead and walk to the people raising your hand if you need a survey. I see some hands. We can go get some surveys at the front table if you don't have them and bring them to you. Okay? Alan, we've got some folks that need some surveys if we can grab them from the front table and bring them back. Sorry, I'm speaking slowly so we have time to get them to you. But these confidential surveys, we've got 2 surveys. One that we'll ask you to complete now, and we're getting some pens and surveys, so I'll give you a chance to raise your hand again in a moment when they come back to the room. But if you complete these surveys, and please keep in mind they're confidential, so we don't need to necessarily know your name. You don't have to use your real name. You can use your nickname, your dog's name, your next door neighbor's name. Just use the same name for both surveys at the beginning of the program and the end of the program so we can link them together. And everyone who completes both Survey 1 and Survey 2 will be entered into a raffle for prizes, so please make sure you complete both surveys, because those prizes, some of which are sitting right in front of me, are pretty cool. There's a Fitbit, a Kindle, some hats, some t-shirts, some speakers, some fair ride tickets, and some other exciting and intriguing items I'll leave up to your imagination. But you have to be present to win those prizes, so stick around to the end of the program. Okay? And we'll be drawing for those door prizes at 8 o'clock at the end of the program. They did clip your raffle tickets to the survey, so make sure you don't take that ticket off of your survey, okay? Unless they were turned in with your dinner. They were? Okay, gotcha. Okay, good to know. I wasn't there for that part of the process. Okay, so we have volunteers coming into the room. Now, if you will, please raise your hand if you didn't get a survey. They will come to you. Raise them high. Anyone can get a survey, and I'll keep talking. All right, so I'd like to spend a moment to thank today's partners and sponsors. This event was planned very collaboratively over the last 8 months. I'd love to take all the credit, but I really can't. It takes a village. You've heard that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, to paraphrase a little bit, it takes a whole community to host one of these programs. And last year, CISCRP was honored to collaborate on this program with over 40 wonderful community partners and exhibitors, many of whom who are listed up here. The staff at these organizations helped spread the word about this AWARE program and expanded our reach in educating the public about clinical research. With their help, we've contacted over 100,000 people in the Triangle community to talk about clinical research. And many of our community and research partners have tables out there in the atrium. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are still talking to them right now because they've got such incredible resources here in our community to share. Many of the partners are still out there talking to folks, so please, if you haven't already had a chance to talk to the community partners, a lot of them will be here until 8 o'clock this evening. I encourage you to do so. Some of our community partners are also doing health screenings. In the atrium, the Mountain Laurel Room, the CARE Foundation is doing HIV screenings, and Rex Health was also in the parking lot earlier this evening. Page 6 of your handbook also lists a lot of these resources. This evening, we have been very grateful for the support of Walgreens, Duke Medical Center, Chapel Hill Chiropractic, Healing with Care, and the Rex Care Vascular Group. Please join me in thanking them for the free health screenings that they provided this evening. I also want to thank our planning committee. They have been extremely helpful to us in bringing this event to life this year. And I do want to recognize their efforts. Over the last 6 months, we have had a very evangelical planning committee. And without their dedication, this program simply would not have been possible. So please also help me extend our gratitude to the individuals on this slide and in your handbooks. We have also, I'd love to thank Reverend Campbell of the local NAACP chapter, who came in to support us as an honorary planning committee member, extending his support and our outreach through the local NAACP group. We really appreciate all the members of our planning committee and our honorary planning committee who assisted us with outreach, identifying speakers, sponsoring the program, and facilitating health screenings. Please join me in a round of applause to recognize the planning team who gave a lot of support to bringing this program to life. CISCRP supporters and our event sponsors extend to the groups of local academic medical centers, a lot of disease and therapeutic specific groups, pharmaceutical companies, contract research organizations, research sites, government agencies, hospitals, patient advocacy groups, as well as simple individuals and corporations that have an interest in supporting research in the community. We have been very, very fortunate to have a lot of kind and generous AWARE for All sponsors for the 4 years that we've planned this AWARE program in our community. Again, I can't say enough about my personal and professional gratitude and appreciation for everyone who's helped bring AWARE back to the Triangle for the 4th time. The Association of Clinical Research Professionals was also kind enough to support giving us contact hours for the professionals that participated in the program this year. We're in a very unique position to have had the Research Triangle Park chapter, the Charlotte, and the Winston chapter, Salem chapter, all come together. All 3 chapters in North Carolina helped to make this event a success, and helping our professionals receive contact hours. So again, please join me in thanking them as well. And a special thank you to our national sponsors this year, EMD Serono, Lupus Research Institute, PMG Research, the Greater Gift Initiative, and supporting this event locally, our host sponsor, the Friday Center of UNC, and local sponsors, Roe, Shulman IRB, Walgreens, Duke Medicine, Duke CTSA, and Artcraft Health. And yes, if I could go ahead and call up each of our sponsors, we do have a special certificate of recognition for you. EMD Serono, do you have a representative that you'd like to send up front? Please join me in recognizing EMD Serono, our national sponsor for AWARE. Do we have a representative from the Lupus Research Institute? Okay. PMG Research. And the Greater Gift Initiative. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Greater Gift Initiative, they donate a free vaccine to an underprivileged, I believe it's a third world country participant, for every clinical trial participant that participates in a trial through PMG Research. And for everyone who came and attended the AWARE event today. And at our last count, Ellen, didn't we have close to 300 registrants? So that's wonderful. Thank you so much to the Greater Gift Initiative. Also, the UNC Friday Center. And I believe we'll just be handing that to them. Roe. Okay. Shulman IRB. And Walgreens, who was also kind enough to donate flu vaccine vouchers to AWARE participants today. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Stacy of the Duke School of Medicine. Dr. Stacy is a professor of neurology and a very highly respected investigator in Parkinson's and other movement disorders. He's also active in research administration for the Duke School of Medicine. He's been the Vice Dean of Clinical Research since 2011, and he'll be sharing foundational information about clinical research. At 6:30 p.m., we're going to have a panel with local clinical research professionals discussing research specifically in asthma, cardiovascular health, and HIV prevention. At 7:15, several clinical trial volunteers will share their stories and experiences. At 7:45, we're going to spend a few minutes wrapping things up and have the raffle. Now, please allow me to so that's a summary of this evening's events. But first, please allow me to welcome Dr. Mark Stacy. Thank you so much.
I don't have to stand on my tiptoes for this. It's nice to be here. I appreciate everybody coming out, and we're starting a little late, so maybe that time frame is going to be shifted a little bit, and I don't want to give you the bad news that I'm going to take all my time still, but I guess I just did. I want to talk a little bit about clinical research, and if you turn in your hymnal, that little handbook, you'll see notes. And I promise you I cannot read all of those notes that quickly, so I'm just going to talk a little bit from the slides and hopefully hit some high points, or at least my perspective of clinical research. So I'd like you all to know that I'm a Parkinson's disease doctor. I've had the great fortune of being involved in clinical research since 1990 as I completed my training. And when I completed my training in Parkinson's disease, we only had 2 drugs to treat people with Parkinson's disease. And in that time, we have been able to approve another 6. We've also been able to approve a surgery treatment for Parkinson's disease that is as close to a miracle as I've ever seen. And we're looking at vaccines for Parkinson's disease, and we're looking at neurotrophic factors, things to grow the brain back. So I've had the great fortune to be involved with this all my adult life. And imagine how grateful I am to volunteers with Parkinson's disease who have given of their time, given of their illness, given side effects, experiences for us to approve new and better treatments for Parkinson's disease. So in 1991, if I saw a patient and I had them on maximum dose of the 2 drugs that they were taking, I was done. Now, how are you going to tell somebody that? I really have nothing less to offer you. It's not what a doctor says. And so I'm eternally grateful for people who have volunteered for participating in clinical research trials, because it has made a difference in my ability to care for people. And that has made a difference in my life. So let's talk about what it is to be a part of clinical research, or what this looks like. And clinical research is a different animal depending on disease type, depending on healthy volunteer, depending on the thinker. So we come up with ideas and we think about things in our offices. So I think about Parkinson's disease, and I think patients with Parkinson's disease can rarely develop a symptom called pathological gambling. And so that's a side effect from one of the medicines that we approved. It was not something we knew that was going to happen very soon, and in fact the medicines were approved and being on the market for several years before that happened. So I sit and think about pathological gambling all the time, to think about, 1, how can I prevent that in my patients, and 2, can my patients help find cures for pathological gambling in people who have gambling problems and addiction problems anyway. So I think about these things all the time, and I think about problems, and I think about how we can answer a question, and the way we answer a question is with a protocol or a clinical trial. So when we look at a clinical trial, we design a very specified series of evaluations in a treatment paradigm. So let's say I have a treatment A and treatment B. One of them is going to be an active drug, one of them is going to be a placebo or a non-active drug. We don't really know which is which, and we enter you in the trial. We put you on this drug. We follow you for a certain period of time, and at the end of the time, if we've done our work right, and if we've been careful in our assessments, and if we've thought about how to measure these differences and responses carefully, we'll see a difference. And if we see a difference in 2 major trials, then we can go to the FDA and ask our government to approve this drug for treating patients. But I'll remind you that clinical care is not the same as clinical trial. So when you come to my office to be cared for Parkinson's disease, I try to take care of you with the medicines that are available. I try to take care of you as best as I can get you with the medicines that are available. And if they're not something that's going to, and if I can't do that well enough, then I'm going to think about, is there a clinical trial that we can test another agent to see if that would would benefit you as a participant, but also lead to drug approval. It's easy to think about in cancer, and so we try you on all these medicines, and there's a new thing to do in cancer. It may not be so easy to think about in antibiotics or infectious disease. Well, I want to be tried on every antibiotic before I think about trying something experimental, because what if I get the placebo? So you have to think about these in a lot of different ways, and clinical trials vary by illness and they vary by participant. But you need to know that they are very much an experiment. If we knew these drugs we were testing worked, it wouldn't be research. We'd already know they worked, and that would be then a standard of care type visit. So some of you might have standard of care visits and experimental research visits at the same time. In my world, I don't really do that, because if I put you in a trial, everything I think about in your care has to do with that trial. Because if I do something that is not allowed in the trial, then you may be excluded from the final assessment. And then I have, in fact, been unethical. It is not ethical for me to recruit you, put you in a trial, and then do something, make an error in the trial where we can't use your data. I have exposed you to a risk for no benefit. So as a principal investigator, when I do these things, I have to be pretty cognizant of that. So people are different. We have many different types of enzymes in our bodies, and although we don't differ very much by the way we look, we do differ in our enzymes. And I'll tell you, the first time I ever really thought about this carefully was when I had a chance in a previous job to care for a hero. So I used to work in Phoenix, Arizona, and Muhammad Ali had Parkinson's disease, and I was young enough, brave enough, foolish enough to ask the Alis, can we put your name on our center? And I think maybe I just caught them so off guard, they agreed to do this. And so I became very good friends with Mrs. Ali. And one time she came to me and she said, you are not enrolling the right population. My husband responds differently to drugs than everybody you are putting in these clinical trials. And she was right. He did not respond, and we did not have data to really care for, in my opinion, the person that meant more to the world in my lifetime than anybody else on the planet. And we need to do better than that. And that's one of the reasons that I became so interested in trying to build infrastructure for clinical research. And I'm very grateful for this organization to try to keep going and keep pushing at it. So what is a phase 4 process? So you hear about a phase 3 clinical trial or a phase 2 clinical trial or even a phase 1 or phase 4. Well, so let's say we come up with an idea and we test it in a petri dish. We test it in a rat model. We test it in a monkey or dog model. And so we've come to the point where we want to test it in humans. We go to the FDA and we say we want to test it in healthy humans first. And so we do a dose exposure to healthy humans, usually volunteers, in a locked lab so we can follow and we can measure blood and do all kinds of things to make sure that it's safe to move on to people with a medical condition. So in my case, it's Parkinson's disease. So we may test this drug in 15 to 20 normal volunteers, and then we want to do the next step of a dose ranging study. So dose ranging study can be done in a phase 1 trial where it usually is, but sometimes we try to hurry up because we're in a hurry to get these drugs approved. In your notes it says 10 years. It is not 10 years. It is a lot longer than 10 years most of the time. But in phase 2 is where we begin to look at safety and we expose a small number of people to this drug. So in Parkinson's disease we typically have a phase 3 trial in which we look at efficacy. Does the drug work? In about 300 people. So we have to do 2 sets of 300 people. So that's a phase 3 program, 600 people. A phase 2 program is usually 2 to 3 studies, and that's often less than 100 people. And that phase 1 program is handfuls, 20. So if we get 2 successful phase 3 trials, we may have a drug ready for approval with exposure of less than 1,000 people to the drug. And that leads to phase 4. And so when I mentioned this pathological gambling, that was a phase 4 issue because we discovered a new side effect with this drug and the FDA required sponsors to go back and look at that carefully. So when you see those ads for restless leg syndrome and they say pathological gambling can occur, that's my fault. I apologize, but I don't want you to get pathological gambling because it's been a big problem. So that's how we rotate through to look at approvals. Now, who looks at clinical trial sponsors? So let's say you can have pharma, so EMD Serono, very interested in bringing new products to market, and so they would be a pharmaceutical company. Duke, North Carolina are both academic medical centers. We both have ideas all the time, and we try to test new ideas. Federal government funds most of our research. We also have device companies like Medtronic that look at devices for deep brain stimulation or cardiac pacemakers. And then biotech companies. So now let's talk about a research team and informed consent. So team is I think the theme for this, I'm not really big into the team contest. I think we compete too much. We're all in this together. So if this is all the team, I'm all for it. but let's don't split off into different places. Principal investigator would be me. And so when I see someone in a clinical trial, I have to change hats. So I take care of you from your medical standpoint, but when I enter you into a trial, my responsibility is to the trial, and it is to make sure that I do not compromise your information. So I become very officious during the measurements because I have to be very careful not to let my clinical opinion sway those measurements. So I don't try to know if you're on the real drug or the placebo. I try to get my work done in terms of the paperwork, and then after I've done that, I can talk to you as a person. But my responsibility foremost is to make sure that I use your volunteerism with respect and dignity, and that I collect information from you that we can help get these drugs approved, or not approved, which is just as important. If a drug doesn't work, we don't want it to come forward. So I guess I'm the coach, is that what that is? Yeah. A coordinator is your link to the study. And I think the coordinator is a person that is extremely important in making sure you understand what is happening in the study, what you can expect, and answers your questions. So as a PI, if I think you are eligible for a study, I don't really want to, and I don't allow anybody at Duke to provide consent, because I'm the doctor, and you're in my room, and I can stand over you, and you can say, yes, you're my doctor, I'll do anything you want me to do. That's not the way we want to do a clinical research trial. We want you to be able to sit down, and in fact, sometimes I'll hand you this consent form and have you go home and think about it, because I want you to be able to think about it without feeling the pressure of, oh, he's got to go to another patient sort of thing. So that's why at Duke we make the coordinator come in and make sure that you're going to have time, you're not going to feel rushed, and you can answer the questions. And in my center, we'll have a coordinator talk to you, and then the doctor will come back and say, do you have any other questions? And then we may let you sign something. And so I talked about coordinator responsibilities. I don't want to go over time. We also have a protection program. And it's called a Human Research Protection Program, and that is the foremost part of that is the Institutional Review Board. So the Institutional Review Board sits separate from the main pathway of administration because they need to make decisions about the ethics of a clinical experiment, a human experiment, and they need to make sure that all of their deliberations have the foremost goal of protecting people who are participating in these trials at all times. And so we keep those separately so those decisions can be made, and we also have a policy that, let's say I came up with an invention, and let's talk about the 60 Minutes piece that we're so proud of at Duke about the polio virus for treating brain tumors. I don't know if anybody of you saw it, but it's really exciting. But a Duke investigator came up with that idea. So should Duke be managing that? Probably not. And so we believe there's a conflict of interest there. So for that IRB evaluation, we have used an independent, somebody from outside of Duke, to say, yes, this is safe, this is reasonable. And then we have a conflict of interest group that I supervise that makes sure that we have split away all assessments from the inventor of that technology. So it's all right for you to invent that technology, and it's all right for somebody else to test that technology. But you cannot invent and test because you have a conflict of interest. You have a bias. Even though you acknowledge it, it's impossible for you to really let go of your baby. And so that's how we separate that. So I've talked a little bit about volunteer protections, and I want to remind you that if an IRB receives information, so let's say that we've entered 80 people in a clinical trial, and we find 2 people that in those 80 that go into renal failure. Well, that's a reason to stop that trial till we figure out, is that new study drug causing kidney problems? And so the IRB is constantly surveilling clinical research, and we know as a clinical research group, and we've trained our coordinators to say, anytime something bad happens, you need to report it to the IRB. They are the official arbiter of the ethics and safety of any clinical trial. The FDA is the approval body for all drugs in the United States. Europe has a similar agency. And the FDA regulates those 4 phases of clinical research. And they also provide guidance. They inspect research centers, and they usually inspect research centers that enroll a lot of patients. So if you're a high enroller, it makes sense to go look at that site. And so often in a 30-site trial, they'll look at 2 to 3 sites to make sure that study is being conducted properly. So you are the volunteers, I am the volunteer, and I have to tell you that in the last 2 years I've become a much better clinical researcher because I've been sick. It hasn't been worth it to me at all, but it has had me think about when do I want to be approached for consent. And so I can tell you when I went to see my eye doctor, and this young doctor, I think probably everybody's experienced this, said, well, for your age, your cataract isn't that bad. I said, well, I'm not going to do a study with that guy. And so we have to work with that physician to say, you know, there's an appropriate way to say things, and you hurt people's feelers when you say things like that. I had another episode where I had a tremendous pain for a surgical episode, and laying in that gurney in the ER, I can tell you that nobody would have thought to come ask me for consent. And I learned that's not an appropriate time to talk to anybody about consent. It becomes a difficult issue to look at things in an emergent setting, but it's not appropriate to ask somebody in acute medical pain to be thinking about a clinical research trial. How can I make a decision? If you said, if you sign this, I'll take your pain away, I've signed it, not a thought. And that'd be all I would be thinking about. I can tell you my wife became very sick, and it's a different thing when you have a loved one sick. I would have signed anything if that surgeon would have come in to say, well, this is an experimental protocol, but it's all we got. So before you go into the hospital, you really need to think about, with your spouse or with your significant other, are we going to do clinical research together? You are my advocate. If I'm laying horizontal, you need somebody vertical to be your advocate. And friends and family and supporters, you need rides at times. You need somebody to come pick up kids at times. There are all kinds of things that we can all do to help one another, and it's called being neighbors. And I think neighbors are important in clinical research. So now when we talk about eligibility, and let's say you want to think about being in a clinical trial. Most important that you understand what you're getting into, and that requires a careful conversation with your clinical research coordinator. Your clinical research coordinator should be patient with you. If your clinical research coordinator is not, maybe you're not going to want to be able to do that. You want to participate in that trial. So I urge you to ask questions and to think about these things and ask very simple things like, what is this going to do for me? What is it going to do for others? What are my risks? How long does it take? How long are the visits? Do you promise they're only that long? Are you going to pay for my gas? There are all kinds of issues that you can talk about that I believe are fair to ask about. And I would say that I would not sign a form in the middle. I would wait for all your questions to be answered before I sign that form. There may be questions you have after you've signed a consent, and we're happy to answer those. But before you sign a consent, you really want to be quite confident that you understand everything. And I'll remind you, even if you sign that consent, you still don't have to participate. And even if you start going and participating in the clinical trial, you have a right to stop your participation at any time. These slides are so good. I didn't do them, but they're good. So you have rights and responsibilities. I don't think you have a responsibility to quit a trial at any time, but you have a right to. But you have a responsibility to understand the study and have a right and responsibility to ask questions so you understand what you're going to be participating in. And so when people ask you about it, you can say, this is why I'm doing this. And so here's the big questions. So what's a study design going to look like? I talked about this randomized clinical trial. So randomization can be a one-to-one randomization. That would be a coin flip. But you could also be potentially randomized where you have one chance of placebo and 2 chances to be on active drug, or 1 chance for placebo and even 3 chances to be on active drug. And so those are something you have to understand, and we move those, excuse me, we move those around because a placebo response matters. And so I have sometimes been crossways with my Parkinson's disease community because in a neurosurgical trial for Parkinson's disease, I think that sham neurosurgery is important. Can you imagine sham neurosurgery? So what sham neurosurgery means is we pretend to do it, but we don't really do it. And so what we've done is in a patient with a clinical trial looking at a drug called glial-derived neurotrophic factor. It was a drug we thought we would cure you of Parkinson's disease. We did an open label trial, everybody exposed to the drug, put the catheters in their head, and everybody got better. People went back to work. It was a miracle. And so then we said, well, we have to do a placebo-controlled trial. We want to make sure this is really working and not placebo effect. People said, how could that not be placebo effect? But we did it anyway. And in the open label trial where everybody got the drug, no side effects, nothing. I'm great. And then we did this randomized placebo-controlled trial, and I have never seen people so sick in my career as when we put people in a randomized setting, and nobody got better. Not a single person got better. So in an open label trial, 30 for 30 were actually 18 for 18 were remarkably better, and then in a double blind trial, 34, 17 in each group, nobody better. That's why we have to do placebo-controlled trials. And we've learned as a result of some of this pathological gambling work that I've done and the placebo-controlled trials that in Parkinson's disease, the neurotransmitter that is deficient, dopamine, increases with placebo response. So in Parkinson's disease, the placebo response is going to treat you. So we have to be very careful with that. I think I'm running out of time or maybe over. They look anxious. So I would tell you that clinical research is important to answer questions. It's the way we get new therapies. Those new therapies may matter to you, they may matter to your friend, they may matter to a family member, they may matter to somebody that you don't know at all. But that's our community. It advances our science and helps us to think about other diseases, and maybe we could try this drug in another area. And finally, I want to remind you that we do pay attention. If you have other questions about what to do with clinical research and your other risks, you need to ask. But you could have side effects from the drug, you could have nausea and vomiting, you could have weight loss, you could have passing out, you could have anything. It takes a toll on you to participate in a clinical trial. So if it's a 12-week trial, that's one thing, but if it's a 2-year trial, that's a lot of work. You need to think about that. There's a financial constraint. Most of the time we will be able to reimburse you a little bit for your travel, but not always. And we always have to be careful that we're not incentivizing you to participate in that clinical research. Because we do not want to put you in a condition where we are buying your time. You're not working, you're volunteering. And also, there's a risk that you could lose privacy and confidentiality about your medical record. We pay close attention not to that happen, but it does happen. So I want you to remind you that even if you participate, the trial could end at any time. If somebody goes into renal failure, we may stop that trial, and so you're not at risk for renal failure. It may not make you feel any better. In fact, we may find that the drug makes you feel worse, and the people who are on placebo feel better. We can't promise that. But we are careful in trying to find the doses. And we need to know about everything that's going on with you. You can't hide information from us. If you've got a problem with kidneys or a problem with diabetes, we need to know that before we enroll you in a trial so we can manage those risks. So do your homework. Take your time with talking about clinical research, and remember to ask questions. And remember, it's your decision every step of the way. So you need to be aware of any potential clinical trials that might help you or help someone in your family. You need to talk with your doctor. You need to talk with research staff. You need to go through the consent process. And then if you participate, it's very important for you to commit the entire length of the study. So if we have a power calculation, we have to have 80 patients, 40 in each arm, and 4 can drop out, so 36 to 36. If 8 drop out, then we don't have a study. So you have to make that commitment. So we can all help teach you things. There are some websites, but seek out information about clinical trials. And thank you for sitting through the evening. I appreciate you being here. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Stacy. That was very educational, and we really appreciate you providing that fountain of information about clinical research. So next, I'd like to invite local area researchers to join me at the front table. And we've invited these researchers to join us for an informal discussion about the research that they're doing in their local topic areas. I've also invited my colleague, Jeannie Hecht from Quintiles, to moderate this research panel. So please join me in a round of applause for Senior Vice President and Global Head of Site and Patient Networks from Quintiles, Jeannie Hecht, as I welcome her to the stage.
Thank you so much. All right, good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all having an enjoyable evening, and I really appreciate the presentation about clinical trials. It's important for all of us. I'm excited to have my esteemed panelists here. First, Dr. Dave Varma, Medical Director of Nash Heart Center, Director of Cardiac Catheterization Laboratory, and Medical Director of the Clinical Research for Boyce Willis Clinic. Next to him is Taylor Bayless, Senior Certified Clinical Research Coordinator from PMG Research. And then Najira Lagogo, who's a physician, a pulmonologist, a medical director of the Duke Asthma, Allergy, and Airway Center, and clinical researcher in respiratory diseases. Then we've got Carissa White, who's the manager of community education and outreach at UNC's Global HIV Prevention and Treatment Clinical Trial Unit. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. So we're going to start out by asking each one of them to talk a little bit about their story and what they're doing and how they're engaged in clinical research. So let's start first with Dr. Varma.
Hi, I'm Dave Varma. I'm a cardiologist in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And I got to Rocky Mount in an interesting way from the University of Virginia and was offered an opportunity to start up the cath lab. And I've brought a lot of things that are clinically relevant to the community. But as I left the University of Virginia and University of Maryland centers, I remembered my training days where we did a fair amount of clinical research and basic research. And I wanted to extend that to the patients in Rocky Mount and the community at large. And we've been involved with clinical trials for some period of time. And I'm a part of the Boyce Willis Clinic, which is a large multi-specialty group of about 60 physicians. And I think we did a really smart thing about 3 years ago in which we started talking to PMG, and I know PMG members are going to speak in a little bit, but we partnered with them in order to expand our research capabilities in the clinic and to do things even better than we had in the past. So we're involved with a lot of clinical trials in the cardiovascular arena for myself, but the ability with working with PMG has advanced our clinical research capacity into other arenas also. To me, personally, I think that clinical research is very important because, number one, it provides my patients an opportunity to get exposed to a therapy that is not readily accessible. And as Dr. Stacy pointed out, there are sometimes a physician in caring for a patient reaches a point where you've done all the things that are already available by the FDA. And the beautiful things about clinical trials, as he also pointed out, is that, in a clinical trial, when I approach a patient to say, I have this therapy that we could offer, and yes, it's true that half of the patients are going to be on placebo, or some portion of the patients are going to be placebo versus therapy, we know that we are offering even that person on placebo the best care that we can possibly do clinically. And that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And in fact, I think that the patients that participate in clinical trials, to some extent because of the physician interaction and the touch points, but also majority-wise because of the study coordinator point of contact and the repeated access to healthcare providers, I think allows those patients to sometimes do better than patients that are cared by in a routine practice. But we're very excited to be a part of the clinical trials. We've seen lots of things happen in the neurology world with, as Dr. Stacy said, but cardiology, my God, over the last 30 years has been just amazing, right? 30 years ago, you took a patient with a heart attack and you put them in bed and gave them aspirin. That's all you could do. And then we finally said, heart attacks happen because of clots. We learned that because of clinical trials. We gave them therapies to dissolve that clot, thrombolytic therapy, streptokinase, TNK, all of those came through clinical trials. Then we said, well, why give them drugs? Let's take them to the cath lab and do angioplasties on them. Let's put 2 stents in them. We learned that that's better than giving thrombolytic therapy. We learned cholesterol therapy is important. We learned what kind of blood thinners to give. So all of that knowledge has come through participation of volunteers that have participated in clinical trials. And it's been quite a journey for us to have participated, and we're very excited about the new frontiers in medicine, and to be able to offer that in our community, which is not as large as Durham and Chapel Hill as far as university abilities, I think that provides a level of care to the patients that they may not find in a smaller community. So we've been very excited about that in the last
Fabulous.
years.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Taylor?
I'm Taylor Bayless. I'm a clinical coordinator. I help run the trials with PMG Research. I actually have my degree in clinical research. I would have not known what research was 6 years ago until I stumbled across this degree. I spoke with the director of the program for about 2 hours one day, and she sold me on it. It's a great opportunity. I learn something new every single day. We work with amazing patients, amazing doctors. PMG is a great company to work for. I couldn't ask for a better family to be around. My day-to-day life, I don't feel like I'm going into work. I'm going in to help people. They're helping me. I'm learning. They're learning. The opportunities are just amazing. I've been able to develop new therapeutic areas in our departments, bring on new doctors, teach them what research is. That way they're able to offer their patients optional treatments that they didn't have before. It's just amazing to see it grow each year. Like I said, 6 years ago, I wouldn't even know what research was, and now I'm here talking about it and teaching people about research. So it's just a great opportunity, and I'm glad everyone's here to learn more about it and hopefully share the word with more people.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Dr. Lugogo?
Thank you for inviting me today. I'm a pulmonologist by training. I came to Durham 11 years ago and began taking care of patients with all kinds of lung diseases. But I was really drawn to asthma patients, and we were very interested in learning more about how to help patients with asthma. Now, quite a number of patients with asthma do quite well and really, frankly, don't need to see me. But there are enough patients who are very disabled by asthma, and I got interested in research because I wanted to do more than I could do in the clinic. And so I wanted to be able to say to my patients, much like the other physicians have said today, that I can offer you something different. So we haven't exhausted every option. And also I wanted to be on the cutting edge of discovery. So we participated in studies for a new drug that's coming out for asthma soon. I have experience with it before any of the other physicians have experience with it. So I can say to my patients, I participated in the study. I understand how this drug is supposed to work. And I'm also able to interact with very intelligent people that work in pharmaceutical companies, with NIH, in groups, trying to answer questions that are very important to patients. And so at the end of the day, it always comes back to how do you best care for patients? How do you provide people with the help that they need? And how do you contribute to knowledge? How do you move a field forward? And how, I haven't had the privilege of saying, the last 30 years have been amazing. I've been doing it for almost 10 years, but it's been a really amazing journey. I've seen patients who are very, very sick get access to drugs they couldn't otherwise get and improve quite a bit. And I've also gotten to work with amazing coordinators and other doctors, and so it's been, all in all, a very rewarding experience. And most of all, I wanted to thank people who come in and trust us and volunteer. Because, you know, there are a lot of myths about clinical research. There's a lot of fear. You know, are you experimenting on me? Am I a guinea pig? Are you going to give me something that is unsafe? And so having those very sensitive conversations with people and saying, yeah, I don't know what this drug is going to do, but that's why we are doing the study, and then having them take a leap of faith with you to be able to help people they don't even know has been, you know, just seeing people be so courageous as to participate in studies has been a very moving experience for me. So I feel like the volunteers and the study participants are by far the most amazing part of this journey. And it's been just a really wonderful 10 years so far. And I'm looking forward to coming back and saying, I've been doing this for 30 years and we discovered all these drugs. So that's my story.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Carissa?
Good evening, everyone. So I come to you this evening from a different perspective. I've been working in the field of HIV and AIDS for 22 years, almost 23 years now. So I've seen the epidemic move in so many directions. My background is in public health with an emphasis in community health. And throughout the years in working in helping individuals and communities understand a little bit more about HIV and AIDS, I was always fascinated at the research that was being done. The fact that when I first started, there were no medications and treatments for individuals who were diagnosed with HIV, so the patients that I encountered had a lifespan of only 6 months to a year. And so at that time, as I began to transition and do more work in other areas related with HIV, dealing with testing and dealing with the education and case management, I continue to stay abreast of all the latest medicines and the new interventions that were being created to address this epidemic. But I also had some concerns about how the research was done in communities, particularly communities who were a little more vulnerable than others because of the lack of resources and the lack of the voice at the table during the research development process. And so we often had researchers who would come into the communities, gather their information, but then would leave. And so the level of mistrust continued to grow, but then people just began to distrust altogether anyone dealing with medicine and research. And a lot of it was because of the way that some of the researchers chose to engage communities. And so I thought that if I took my training and if I could take it and use it to make it more effective in the research realm, then that was my next phase of my career. So I had the wonderful opportunity to be hired at UNC Chapel Hill when they decided to become a research site for some HIV prevention trials, and one of their responsibilities was to hire someone who could work directly with the community, to bridge the communities with the researchers so that they could have a better understanding about the research process, try to increase their health literacy as well as their research literacy so that they too could have an opportunity to participate in research. African Americans represent, 13% of the population, but when we look at the number of newly diagnosed cases of HIV, they represent over 50% of those cases. When we look at the number of people living with AIDS, African Americans represent over 50% of those people living with AIDS, but yet still they represent less than 5% of those participating in clinical research. That is a problem. And so we began to dissect those problems. So we asked our own selves, how could we do a better job of engaging communities so that they could feel like they were being an active part of the process, not feeling like researchers was trying to work on them, but actually work with them to answer some of these questions. And so I've been in this position now for 6 years. It has been a challenging experience because when you're thinking about trying to help people move beyond that level of mistrust of research, then it can be very challenging. But it also puts me in a very good position that I can take that information back to the researchers, develop opportunities where the two can come together and talk about the research so that they can bring their concerns directly to the researchers. The researchers have an opportunity to engage with the different communities who they want to recruit for their studies, to have this really honest dialogue about what their concerns are and what can we do differently so that the community doesn't feel like there's helicopter research taking place and they're left with nothing. So part of my role is also helping to leverage that equity, increasing that voice at the table, and also holding the researchers accountable so that when we've completed the study and it's time to disseminate the findings, that it's just not limited to the manuscripts that are usually published in some of the larger publications and going to these large conferences and sharing their findings with their constituents. But the community has a say-so in how the information will be given back to them, particularly in communities where the research took place. So I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you.
Good job. Great. Amazing work by all the panelists, and that was such a moving story, so thank you for sharing that. I wanted to open the floor up to all of you to see if there are any questions from the audience for these esteemed panelists.
I actually wanted to make a comment about something that Carissa said because I also work in HIV, and I guess because I come from that field, I think it's important that in research we do have community advisory boards, and we are here today as our community advisory board from Duke for the Duke AIDS Research and Treatment Center. And the community advisory board helps to look at what people are wanting to do for research before they actually submit it. And the community provides insight as to what may or may not work that someone else didn't think about, you know, like things that are unique to the community that researchers may not understand. And then when those results, when they're also invited to participate in those clinical trials, and when those clinical trials the results come out, they come back and they share those results with our community advisory board. We just had a meeting last Monday. We had a young woman who came from the Center for AIDS Research who received funding, did the study on social determinants of health of African American women, African American mothers living with HIV. She completed her study, and she actually came back some months later now, actually I think it's like more like a year plus later, and shared those results with the CAB, and it was very important. And so what Carissa's talking about this idea of that the community is being asked to participate, and it's important that we're not just posting things in places, but that we're coming back and talking to the community about those results, and having them be part of the discussion of how a clinical trial is done too. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I completely agree. Any questions or comments from the audience? Others for our panelists? I have a couple questions, and Carissa, you commented on it, that African Americans comprise about 13% of the U.S. population and account for only 5% of clinical trial participants. Similarly, Hispanics account for 16% of the total population, but comprise just about 1% of the clinical trial population. You know, how can we help resolve these underrepresentation of minorities in clinical research? And maybe I'd ask all the panelists or those that would care to comment.
Well, I can share. There's a large research group called the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, and several years ago, there's a subcommittee that looks at underrepresentation of different groups in clinical trials. And what they shared was that oftentimes, a lot of it's due to a lack of awareness. People are just not really fully understand the whole purpose behind research. And oftentimes, and even in my own work, I've learned that everyone's experience is different. And depending on what your background is and what was the culture of your home, if the conversation around medicine and research and the importance of it in order to advance medicine, if that's not a common conversation, then oftentimes you're not going to find people just every day talking about research. And so addressing the lack of awareness, addressing the distrust, what was done in the past, and trying to help people to recognize that it was because of those studies that were done in such an unethical way, but it did provide us with the framework of how we should do things better. But we also answered a lot of questions as well. So although a lot of people were hurt, now we're doing a better job, and as a result of that, more people are being helped. So how do we move people from feeling hurt, feeling like a guinea pig, to where they can see the benefit of the research, as we've already alluded to, that you have these extra eyes watching over you, and oftentimes, other conditions may be identified because of the extra eyes watching a person doing the research. So I believe if we practice a little humility when we go into communities and recognizing that there's strengths in all communities, but allowing them an opportunity to work the process. And sometimes that takes time. And oftentimes the funders don't want us to take that extra time, which is why it's important to have someone in place to bridge that process.
Dr. Varma, I think you had some comments.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important question that you ask, and Chris has got some very important points that she makes. What I would say is that, for physicians, it's very important to have diversity and representation of the community that we want to extend the treatment to be participating in the trial. When the first cholesterol trials were done, they were done in Scandinavia. And the 4S study was the Scandinavian cholesterol trial that was a major change in how we practice preventive cardiology. And so simvastatin, which is one of the S's in the 4S, was approved based on the Scandinavian trial. In that trial, there were no minorities. It's a Scandinavian-based trial. And so we wanted, and so I think that the country has had an emphasis on trying to recruit a diverse population into the research trials, because we know that the results of the research apply to the populations that are studied in that trial. And Rocky Mountain, we're a little bit lucky in that there's a relatively large African American population already present in Rocky Mountain, much more than 12% of the national population. And so we have a number of participants of all ethnic variety in Rocky Mountain. But I think that the name of this conference is exactly what the answer to your question is. The name of this conference is AWARE. And awareness is what we need among physicians, among study coordinators, among the population at large. And I think that one-to-one conversations with coordinators and patients can overcome a lot of the historical things that are associated with clinical research trials, et cetera. And I think, we've not found that to be a detriment or an obstacle in recruiting patients into trials if we could sit carefully with them and explain the trial to them. And Eastern North Carolina has a large African American population. We don't have as much of a Latino population, but or at least that we see in our clinic. But I think that those bridges those gaps can be bridged, and I think that we can be successful in this day and age in moving forward in recruiting a diverse population to our clinical trials. And it's very important to applying those results then to the community at large.
Great, thank you. All right, another question.
Thank you very much. That was very informative, all of you. I was curious if your research centers have patient liaisons or people who could speak with individuals in the community who want to get involved in a trial or learn more, and how can they find out about that person?
So one comment, and then I'll answer your question. So actually, in our asthma studies, we found that the minority is men. So we have a very good African American population, about 50% of some of the studies we've been doing, but we really don't have a lot of men volunteering for clinical research. Probably 2/3 of our participants are women. In our COPD study, we've had a few more male patients, but I think the male representatives, at least in terms of our clinical research group, is limited, and we don't really understand what the issue is. And then with regards to having a community liaison, about 2 years ago at the Duke Asthma Center, we hired Deborah Jackson. And Deborah, is very well versed with the community. We felt like we needed to go to the community not only to recruit, but to increase awareness of asthma in general. And so we go to different venues like Head Start and different women's empowerment, different screenings, different events. And a great majority of the time, she's really not even talking about our clinical trials. She's just talking to people about asthma and breathing and COPD and how to get help. And a few times we've had people who ended up seeing us in the clinic as patients and not even participating in studies, but there is that just general awareness about your condition and what resources are out there. And I think, like Carissa, Deborah has been invaluable to us in terms of helping us understand, for example, when you're consenting a patient and you're talking about double blind and crossover, and people don't understand those things. And so how do you communicate those things in a way that people can understand it and be able to really sign up for something that they truly understand? And so we've been really trying to bridge that gap and meeting people where they are, because sometimes people don't have transportation, but they want to participate. How do you help a patient to come to the clinic? And working with our pharma companies to say we need to be able to offer transportation, we need to be able to offer medication. Because you come into a study for a new medication added to your other medication, but you can't afford the other medication. So advocating and saying, well, you need to provide the other medication in addition to the new medication and the placebo. And so those are things that I feel Deborah has sort of brought to our attention, and it's made for a very wonderful interaction, and I feel like we've gotten a lot more patients from the community, and not patients necessarily in our own clinic that are coming to us that wouldn't ordinarily come in. So I think liaisons are pretty critical, not only to bridging the knowledge gaps, but just empowering the research teams to speak the right kind of language and be able to really communicate on another level with participants.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other comments from the panelists?
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
I do.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Rita McDaniel. I have several concerns. Sorry. Now on this.
I'll stand for you.
Okay. The several concerns that I have is one, I'm a 22-year-old survivor of HIV. And I also have been participating in some clinical trials. I wish I knew about pulmonary and the cardiovascular. Those are issues that I'm now suffering from. But a lot of the things that are a deterrent for me to participate is when you have a BMI over a certain level, yes, you're not allowed to participate, excuse me. So that's very discouraging to the fact of large women need good health care also. And to me, sometimes I feel like I'm being discriminated against because I weigh a certain amount. The other thing that I've oftentimes bring up, because I'm a part of the dark cab in Duke, is when years ago when I was a drug user, my main concern was for clinical trials was to see what I was going to get out of it to support my habit. So it's becoming to be that time of the year again. I've been clean for 5 years, so that's not my main reason for participating now. It's to support the people that I know that want to participate in clinical trials. The other thing is a big part of education. Most of the people that I know that when they hear the word clinical trial is what can you get out of it? How much are they paying? Are they providing transportation to get to and from the clinical trial? But there's no education to that to say, okay, if I agree to participate in this, tell me about exactly what I'm doing. How is it going to benefit not only me, women, African Americans, and what's the ratio when other people participate, whether they're Caucasian or Latino? None of that is brought back to us. So we participate in this just because we want the benefits out of it, meaning whether it's gift cards or whether it's a monetary gift. But we're not being educated in how it's providing help for not just me, but our community as a whole and the results of it. So I think that is left out, and we're not informed as in a community about what we're participating in. And like I said, most of the people that I know, their main goal is how much is it going to pay? What am I going to get out of it? Not the physical benefits of helping somebody else or myself. Like I said, I have a big problem with, there are several times I've tried to get involved in clinical trials and my BMI was too high for the clinical trial. And I feel like that's a discrimination part, there's a stigma there. So sometimes stigma will keep people from participating also because of whatever type of the disease that they have. And the other problem that I see is, I know now that most of the time that when I do a clinical trial, if it's not brought to my attention because my viral load has gone way up and my CD4 has dropped way down, does even my doctor or someone in the clinic come to me and say, hey, we have this trial for you to participate in. Most of the time I go to the independent now to see what clinical trials may be advertised in there. NHIS is very good for putting their stuff in there. The other thing is, I have 2 organizations that I participate with. So like tonight, the information that I get from here, I'll send out texts and say, hey, these clinical trials are going on, call and see if you participate. Because other than that, there's not enough word of mouth, there's not enough posters or saying that these things are out. Duke's not having as many clinical trials as they used to have. So even with UNC, if I don't see it posted in some type of magazine, newspaper, then I don't know that it's out there or word of mouth. So those are the concerns that I have, and I apologize for earlier. That it's just not really, or I guess I should say, it seems like it's only getting to certain populations or certain people, and not the general population as a whole.
Well, thank you for sharing. We really appreciate that. And I think you raised a couple of really good points, which is the first is about inclusion and exclusion criteria in clinical trials. And then the second is awareness. And I did want to say one thing around awareness. I had the opportunity yesterday to spend some time up on Capitol Hill, because there is a group of us that are focusing on how do we try to drive a clinical trial awareness campaign nationally, similar to a donate blood or a donate organ campaign. And so we've been having conversations with the Senate and Congress, specifically looking at opportunities there so that the general population does understand or can understand eventually over time. It's going to take us a long time, but I hear those concerns. But maybe just for those of you on the panel, let's address the inclusion exclusion criteria. Comment? Any general thoughts about that, or?
Well, I will just speak as far as what is taking place when it comes to HIV, and I'll probably pull Julia in. A lot of times, I think initially when clinical trials were being conducted, we were recruiting large numbers of individuals, because at the time there was a limited amount of medications, and so we want as many people to participate because that was their primarily way in order for them to receive medication. However, now the inclusion criteria is so narrow because they're asking very specific questions. At one time, people did not have a long lifespan. Now we have people with HIV living past 20, 25 years with the virus, living with AIDS for 30 years. And so what's happening is people are aging. And so initially when these medications were being developed, it wasn't with the expectation that people would be living this long. And so you don't know the level of toxicity after such a long period of time. Now people, again, they're aging. And so now you have to address other chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, all these other different types of cancers. And so now the studies are looking to answer those specific questions. Does HIV impact those other chronic diseases, and does it expedite that process? And so in order to protect people, they only allow people to come in who, even though they're diagnosed with HIV, they may have some other chronic diseases that if they join that study will bring further harm. And so people are saying we don't want to be harmed. So when the inclusion criteria is narrowed, now to prevent that harm, which means a lot of people will be eliminated. So it's not to hurt, it's just that we have to take extra precautions now to make sure that if these drugs will enhance any other, complications of other conditions, then it means that, we have to eliminate some people and not all. And even when it comes to individuals with a higher BMI, some of it's because of the diagnostic testing. Some of the equipment may not be able to handle a person of a certain weight. Is it right? No. Hopefully we'll be able to advance the different types of equipment to be able to handle people who fall above that BMI.
So I think that was a really good answer. I sadly have to wrap up the panel. I'm so sorry. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank all of the panelists and really appreciate your time tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
I'd like to introduce our next moderator, Tama Hargraves. Tama is a very advocate patient herself, and very significant patient advocate in the community, and is going to come forth and help us welcome some other patients who have a lot to share about themselves. If our esteemed patient advocates will make their way forward to the podium. Mr. Mancor, Ms. Guy. We have others. Thank you so much. Do you need some assistance? Here we go. Thank you. And I'm going to introduce our patient moderator, Tama Hargraves, who will be moderating this patient panel. So please join me in giving them a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
I'll let everyone get settled. I'm a retired speech-language pathologist. After 42 years, I decided to do something else with my life. So I am now a lay navigator at UNC Chapel Hill's Thoracic Oncology Department. And as of November, I will be a 9-year lung cancer survivor, stage 3B. And I'm a product of a clinical trial. So I would like to introduce our panel. Our first person is Susan Gerbeth Jones, research advocate for Parkinson's Disease Foundation. She grew up as a Hoosier and went to school at Purdue, North Carolina, and Duke University, and she retired as an assistant dean of technology in the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke. With regards to managing her Parkinson's, I had to read this because I loved what you wrote here. She's thankful for her meds, yet tries to keep them at a minimum and opts instead for alternatives such as exercise, moving to music, laughing, and eating good food. And she's doing a lot in the community for Parkinson's Foundation. Next, we have Clara Guy, who is a patient at the Duke glioblastoma immunotherapy vaccine trial, which you heard probably Dr. Stacy refer to. She was a young gal in the prime of her life, pregnant with her second daughter, when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. A year after her surgery, she was diagnosed with a highly aggressive cancer, glioblastoma, and given a prognosis of 6 to 18 months with 2 kids. So many of you probably saw the CBS news report on the research that has been done at Duke on immunotherapy for brain tumors. So we're very happy to see you, Clara. We then have Terry is it Mancor?
Mancor, yes.
Mancor, okay.
It rhymes with Lauren's last name.
And he is a New York Times bestselling author and science fiction fantasy author of over 20 years. He's been a long-term resident of the RTP, and he and his family have participated in numerous clinical trials over the years. He was recently diagnosed with a rare condition which is challenging me as a speech therapist to say this, but dysautonomia. Am I got that? So he's going to tell us about that. And so he's now become even more familiar with the side of research, clinical research. And then finally, I have Rebecca Fowler, who is from Wilmington. She was a patient with very high cholesterol and has a very interesting story how a clinical trial for her cholesterol sent her on another journey. So she will share with us about that. So we're going to give each person about 5 minutes to tell their story, and then we will open it up for some Q&As after that. Susan?
One thing about clinical research is that it is a little risky, and I'm going to take a risk today, this evening, and suggest that you all need to get woken up. And so I'm going to teach you a little thing that we do in Parkinson's dance, which was actually in a clinical study at one point. And it's a little sequence that we do with our hands, and I'd like you to join me. You slap twice, clap twice, over, under, fist, fist, and left and then right. And we do this to a song called We Go Together, which I'm sure you will recognize if I have my... Okay, you ready? We're going to do this. Over, under, hip tight. Then you can say change, 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 change the bar. Now we get to do it again because it's a study. We have to do it multiple times. Here we go. Over, under, fist, over, hip tight, hip tight. Change, 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 change the bar. Woo-hoo! Okay. Now let's see if I can get it to stop. Thank you. So clinical research is really not that difficult. It is research with people to answer a question. And it can be very simple. Like if I had the question, does hula hooping help my stiffness and my tremor? Then I would try to get Dr. Stacy to take this on and see if I hula hoop for a while, maybe my tremor will settle, or maybe I can move a little better. Or if one will work, maybe two will work. And have a ball with this, and you wouldn't believe how much family fun we have with hula hoops, all sizes, and they teach a class over at the Sportsplex. So all I need to do now is to get somebody to organize the study and see if it actually works. So I'm actually a clinical research study junkie. And one of my favorite they've been giving guinea pigs a bad rap here, but my daughter gave me this card once, which I don't know if you can see. I'll describe it. It's a guinea pig on one of those little wheels, you know, that you run in. But this little guy is on the outside of the wheel with a helmet on. And he is ready to take off because clinical research is what we need to solve some of these diseases. And we have to do it if it's not the people who have the disease doing it, then our friends and family can also help with that because they need controls just as much as they need the guinea pigs. So when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's back, I guess it was 12 years ago now, I was 47. And the first thing I did was signed up for a clinical study. Well, that was the second thing. I used Dr. Google first and got totally horrified of what my life was going to be. And so I decided I had to do something. And the clinical study I signed up for needed people who were recently diagnosed. They sent us up to Yale, and we took a drug, and they also coupled it with a scan, a new scan called SPECT scan. And they injected this radioactive drug into my arm, and I thought, oh my gosh, because I didn't eat artificial foods, artificial colors, any of that, so it was a little freaky. And they give you a little card that says you can pass the scanner at the airport even though you might light it up, which was also scary. But it turns out it was a really good thing to do because it got me connected with other people. I got to see doctors, I got to travel. Unfortunately, that study was not a beneficial one, and they ended up dropping it because it made people worse instead of better. But it was still a really good experience, and I've signed up for others since then. And I know I don't have very much time, but there are things that, for example, you all could sign up for Empower. Anybody with an iPhone could sign up for Empower, or if you have a Droid, you could sign up for Insight. It's a Fox trial. And what those are, 3 times a day, you walk 20 steps, do a little tapping test, which is one of our diagnostic things for Parkinson's, and also say, ah, for 20 seconds, and do a little memory game. And your data will be sent to the researchers collecting this data. That's a really easy study, and all of you could sign up for those. Those are called observational studies. What else have I done? I'm probably used up my minutes. Well, anyhow, if you're interested in other studies, I've done several, probably close to 20, and I highly recommend them and encourage those with or without certain conditions to consider it. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Clara Guy. You've probably seen me written in the little brochure thingamajiggy. They told me to give a little bit of information about myself. Like I said, my name is Clara. I'm an interior designer. I work locally. I do a lot of residential work, a lot of commercial work. That's the fun stuff between, say, 8 and 5 every day of the week. The really, really fun stuff, the bigger adventure, happens after 5 and usually before 6 a.m. That would be with my 2-year-old and my 5-year-old. And it was with my 2-year-old that I started off with very bad headaches. And the doc that was getting ready to help deliver that little young lady was the one that said, well, hey, we can do an MRI. You've had these bad, bad headaches. We'll check them out, and you probably just need a big Excedrin, and you'll be fine. And it was with that that they found something about the size of a baseball in the side of my head. So needless to say, her birthday is a real happy birthday every year when we get to celebrate it. However, the little bad boy came back, and my first doc wasn't making me so happy. That first doc said, you've got about 6 to 18 months, but good luck. And that literally was what I was given. I needed a little more motivation. We come from a bit of a noisy family. I have 2 sisters that are Ironman athletes, cyclists galore, everybody under the sun. And so to be told that you're given this sentence and that's what it's going to be wasn't acceptable. So we started looking. We Googled like crazy. And lo and behold, there was somebody a couple of zip codes over named Friedman at Duke. And he said, well, heck yes, absolutely. We can operate on it. Well, when they operated on it, they found out that, oh, it's not stage 2 anymore, it's stage 4. So it was, okay, what else can we do? Give me more, cheer more, let's go team. And at that point, the team really jumped out. And that was when the researchers at Duke came out and said, okay, here's where we can fit in. Here's what we can do. And they lined up the game plan. Their game plan lasted for about 8 months. And it synced up actually with the regular treatment. So I had chemo, I had radiation, I had vaccines galore. And there was so much that at the end of it, there's no more tumor. And I haven't had a tumor in over 13 months, which is pretty cool. So with that, my team is now the cheerleading team for all the lovely researchers. These are people that are so motivated, they're looking at every single option. The option that worked out best for me was a particular type of virus that they then basically turbocharge your immune system to fight it. And by turbocharging your immune system then tags onto the tumor cells and eats them up. And so what they did, even though I despise needles, I don't know how people deal with them. However, for that lovely 8 months of treatment, I met lots of needles, and lots of needles met me. However, that was the turbocharge that got it moving. And like I said, these research folks over at Duke, they're energy-charged folks. They were ready, willing, and able to do whatever it took. My fear of needles, that was okay. They distracted me. I mentioned I do interior design. One of the nurses, she was awesome. Every time she had a question for me. So what kind of backsplash do you think I need? What paint color would look good in here? What fabric do you think is good for my couch? It was fantastic. Before you knew it, 4 vaccines, done. And so that was great, and that was one day of the week. They asked me also about things with my family. Were there challenges for them? Were there any hiccups along the way? And I will say the biggest was certain folks in the family that didn't know what questions were okay to ask and what weren't. And I found out as a patient, it's really good to come up with stuff that you're comfortable talking about. Some patients are okay with whatever they've got, whether it be a type of cancer, or heart disease, liver something, diabetes, whatever, that they're very comfortable talking about it. Others, not so much. And I had certain days of the week where a little bit of anxiety turned into turbocharged anxiety. And so because of that, I've learned certain ways that I could pause conversation with folks. And this is what the docs at Duke, the nurses at Duke, the research people at Duke gave me all the tips and things that I needed so that I wasn't going to have a nervous attack when I was going in for those lovely 4 vaccines that day. So they were great encouragement with that. Another thing, let's see, they asked would I do it again? Yeah. Did I mention I'm a bit of a cheerleader for it? I would do it again in a heartbeat. There's nothing I would say but hope. They give you, your friends, your family, your parents, your children, anybody around you in something where one person tells you 6 to 18 months, and the other people tell you, let's try harder, we can do it, let's have hope, I'll go there. So, that's all I got.
Thank you.
There we go. Hi, I'm Terry Mancor. I am an author and actually went to school at UNC. I got a degree in religious studies, which is why I'm an author. I grew up in Durham, and you can't really grow up in the research, went to Jordan High School. You can't really grow up in the Research Triangle Park area and be unaware of research any more than you can grow up in Iowa and be unaware of corn. I believe that I entered the job field about the time that Research Triangle Park started getting more lab mice than we had tobacco plants in the county. So that was a very significant shift, and at the time, as a young college student, my primary interest in clinical research was the little studies that popped up in the back of the Carolinian Daily Tar Heel, I'm sorry, and the possible remunerative benefits of that. Being a religious studies major, that really meant a lot to me, not because of the compassion issue, but because it's very difficult to look forward to a bountiful career after graduation. So, but before I began taking clinical studies, I actually worked as an undergraduate for some clinical studies in and around the UNC area. So I was somewhat familiar with how studies worked, the scientific basis of them, the general split between the hard science and then the clinical aspect. I understood the different phases, or so I thought. And then after graduation, I was a temporary medical secretary. I think I've worked at 15 to 18 different departments between Duke and UNC, including Duke Medical Education, UNC OBGYN, UNC Lineberger Cancer Research Institute. I was all over the place. As a science fiction writer, I had a broad interest in the very fascinating developments that were going on in RTP at that time. I got to work at a lot of places out at the park. You know, I thought I knew a lot about clinical research. Once I started becoming successful as an author and met a gorgeous undergraduate science major who would later become my wife. At the time, I didn't realize she would be going into clinical research. She was more interested at the time in bench work at Duke, and she actually did Alzheimer's research for a while I was, you know, writing fantasy books and generally ignoring the great scientific developments that were going on. Then we had children, and it's a testament to our faith in the medical community that my wife, who was diagnosed as completely infertile, now has 3 children in the audience. So we're anytime that we deal with the medical community in general, there's a certain degree of skepticism. And after working within the medical community on the back end, you kind of know that there are times when doctors will tell you stuff just because they don't know what else to say, and they try to give you hope and all that. And luckily, all 3 of our children were very healthy, and until we got into that lovely period where their personalities started to emerge, and we recognized that some of our children had symptoms of ADHD. So we enrolled in a study, our entire family at Duke, and did a study where everybody was tested for ADHD, and they were looking at whether there was a genetic component, and it seemed very innocuous and a lot of fun. You know, the kids had a good time, and at that point, my wife, and I'd like to take a moment here, and I'm sorry if I'm running over time, but I would like to invite everybody to give my wife, Lauren, a round of applause. She did a tremendous amount of work organizing and putting this Aware for All event together. And this is, I believe, the 4th Aware for All event that she's been instrumental in, and it's grown every year, and it's amazing to see just how much it has grown, and I just wanted to call her out for that because she's terribly embarrassed by it. In any case, when we completed the ADHD study, and we got some great testing that would have cost us a lot of money out of pocket, wasn't covered by insurance, we thought our role with clinical research was more or less done. And then in 2012, I was on a scout camp out. I'm the assistant scoutmaster for Troop 439 in Bahama, North Carolina. One of my scouts unfortunately got injured by a dog. It wasn't serious, but there was blood and there was a dog, and you know, we were out in the middle of the woods, and it was a very stressful time. And what I didn't realize at that point is that was the first time that I started getting sick. And for the longest time, we didn't know why I was getting sick. My symptoms were weird. They were gastrointestinal, they were cardiac, they were kind of all over the place. And so we ended up embarking on a long journey to try to figure out what's wrong with Dad. Luckily, we have one of the most advanced medical research facilities on the planet 20 minutes down the road, and a lot of good basic scientific knowledge going into this. And after about 2 years of chasing down such bizarre diagnoses as pseudopheochromocytoma and all sorts of other Latin polysyllables that you really don't want to get into, and started crossing off the boxes, we weren't left with a whole lot that wasn't really scary. At that point, we were able to establish, with my wife as a medical historian, and pushing forward more or less as citizen scientists, because every department that we would go to would give us tests and then move us on. It's not that they were uninterested, but you know, if you spend a year with a particular department and they come back and say, well, you don't have any of this stuff, we can't do anything else for you. They move you on. Well, I discovered about a year ago, I was finally diagnosed thanks to Dr. Fraser Mills over at Duke in the Cardiac Center, that I have a form of dysautonomia. And has anybody here heard of dysautonomia? Okay, my family, put your hands down. But great. It's a little rough when you have to explain what your medical condition is to your doctors, and that's where we have found ourselves now. Dysautonomia basically means, and it can come across in a lot of different ways, but it basically means I have a glitch in my built-in operating system that keeps all of my essential functions working. It's not like a lot of other stuff, and it's easy to misdiagnose. And most of the time I look fine and I feel great, and I go to work and write and do scouts and stuff, but when I have an attack, I come near to death every single time. In the last 3 years, I've had 13 hospital admissions through the ER, and a couple days later, I more or less walk out looking fine. At this point, when you have a rare disease, and when you have a rare disease that not even your doctors are really familiar with, you really have to become empowered as kind of a citizen scientist yourself if you're going to find out A, what's wrong with you, and B, how to treat it. And at this point, where so many people don't know what dysautonomia is, and I'll point out that this is Dysautonomia Awareness Month. Look for the turquoise ribbon. But when you don't have a lot of people who know and understand what's wrong with you, you naturally look towards clinical trials for some sort of answer. Unfortunately, with rare diseases, even with some place like Duke, magical place like Duke, and all the resources that they have, there are really very few clinical trials available out there for dysautonomia patients and so many other rare diseases. So one of the things that I'd like to encourage everybody today is if you're healthy, volunteer for a clinical trial to be a control. If you're unhealthy, look for clinical trials that can answer some of your questions. And I'll be honest, you'll be excluded in a lot of cases for reasons that seem unfair or unjust. But the fact is that the basis of clinical research is the science, and the people who are the folks that were up here before us, as compassionate people as they are, they've got rules that they have to follow, and they have specific questions that they need to answer. And unfortunately, sometimes as a patient, as a subject, you just don't fit the bill, and you have to keep looking, keep searching, keep being hopeful, and sometimes even suggesting clinical trials or approaches to your doctors. This is an amazing medical community with brilliant people, PhDs and MDs as far as the eye can see. But the patient, the subjects, that's part of that equation too. And your participation in clinical trials as a sick subject or as a control subject all adds to that pool of knowledge that gets us one more step closer to an effective treatment for whatever disease it is. I'm being told I need to shut up now, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Fowler, and I thoroughly believe in clinical trials, because if it wasn't, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of y'all tonight. I've always had high cholesterol. I didn't be as fat as I am now. When I first realized I had bad high cholesterol, I only had like 3% body fat. And they told me my cholesterol was 250 then. Well, so the doctor put me on the medicine that they had. Well, that didn't work. So I would stay on a medication for 6 months, sometimes 9 months, and then he would try me on something else. I had tried everything they had on the market, every new one, everything. And then in December of 2012, my husband was going to the heart doctor, and which is in Wilmington Health, where PMG is located. in that building, and we were going up in the elevator, and I noticed, hey, there's a sign up there, clinical trial. You can't tolerate statin drugs, have high cholesterol, sign up. So I called, and they said, okay. So January the 4th of that year, I started. And evidently, I was on the right, I was not on the placebo, but what I like about the clinical trials is it's like you're individually cared for. Well, I went through the 4-month study, and then at the end, the heart doctor called me in. He said, Becky, he said, I need for you to take this this paper, and go see your primary care doctor. And my trial had just ended, so I went to see my primary care doctor. This was on a Friday, so I went to see my primary care doctor on a Tuesday. He came in, he sent me to have blood drawn, then he called me back. He said, go back and sit down. I heard him go in his office, and I heard Dr. Martin get on the phone, and he said, I want her seen within 48 hours. And I thought, what in the world? You know, why is there such an urgency in me seeing another doctor? And he came in and he said, I could give you the diagnosis, but I want you to go see Dr. Kotz. And he said he's at the Cancer Treatment Center in Wilmington. And I thought, what kind of cancer do I have? Well, went to see Dr. Kotz. And this was the next 2 days later. And he drew some blood. And then when he came back in, he said, I'm glad you're here. He said, because if you had not come in, or this had not been discovered as quickly as it has been, he said, in another month or so, you probably wouldn't be around. You would have either died of a massive heart attack or a massive stroke. He said, your blood is so thick, it's like sludge. And I said, what in the world? He said, well, the 19 years I've been practicing as a cancer doctor, he said, I've only had 2 patients with this type of leukemia. And he said, and you're number 2. I have been diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, and that is where it affects the platelets in your blood, not the red blood cells or the white blood cells. But my blood had gotten so thick, I mean, I could cut myself and I wouldn't bleed. When they tried to draw blood, they had such a hard time even getting 1 tube of blood from me. So that's why I'm here tonight, is to tell you, look, you know, if you got a clinical trial, even if you're healthy, go do it. I mean, you might can save somebody else's life. And I know that I was on the real medication, because for the first time ever, my cholesterol dropped under 200. So I just...
I think we're kind of running out of time on questions and all that. I'm going to add just one statement that I feel that I've learned over the last 9 years, and this is in particular to cancer. You know, when you get that diagnosis, the C word, your initial reaction is just get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. Let's start treatment right away. Sometimes, if you do that, that would disqualify you from doing a clinical trial, which in my case, I waited 9 weeks. I shopped for my treatment until I found somebody who gave me a little bit of hope. And so I do caution some people, when you think about, if you want to participate in a clinical trial, that's great. But for cancer especially, if you do start treatment, and because these studies are so controlled that, you know, you've started a treatment, then you don't qualify for the clinical trial, which could save your life. So that's my little input on that. Do we have time for any questions at all? One question. Anyone have a question for any of the panel? Anyone for any questions? Oh, there's a hand. Okay.
I noticed that I've been to a couple of trials and years ago, and I noticed now a lot of trials have age limit. And I don't want to say to discriminate against older people, but I would think that there would be trials for older people for letting them live longer still. I don't know. And I just wonder, that's why I came, to see if there was anything new for older people.
Actually, sir, I'd suggest you check out clinicaltrials.gov. That's kind of a central database of a lot of the clinical trials that are going on in the United States right now. And don't restrict your search to just the United States. Europe, Asia, there are trials going on all over the world in all sorts of things. While your age may prohibit you from some trials, it actually is an inclusionary criteria for other trials. So it's worth it. If you're interested in doing clinical studies, then I go to clinicaltrials.gov and look around and see if there's not a study out there that you fit for.
But most of the major academic centers here in North Carolina also, they have their own clinical trial sites, and a lot of them, even if they don't have something they can offer you, they will. If they care about you, they'll send you on to someplace else that might have it. I understand what you're saying about the age factor, same as this young lady.
There's an obvious reason. You're older, of course you're looking to save the majority of the population. I can understand.
Well, they want good results, let's be honest about that, so, yeah.
I would like to add, though, with respect to your question, if there is a trial that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to communicate with your physician, because in most clinical trials, physicians actually do have some opportunity to weigh in based on clinical judgment. So I would encourage you to not easily take no as an answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's one more thing that I would like to add. You can also go and volunteer yourself on a site called researchmatch.org, and all you have to do is go and click on the volunteer tab and then put in all the information that you want to put in about yourself, and you can be pulled into clinical trials as well to participate. And these are trials all over the state as well as the country.
Just to echo that, yes, I'm a member of Research Match. I also have utilized the Search Clinical Trials service that CISCRP has to offer. It's a manual, customized search for any individual who fills out the form online or can mail in the form, and the CISCRP team will actually search for trials in your area or how far you're willing to travel that might fit for you, and they'll connect you with the research team so you can follow up with them. Thank you for your question. So we are wrapping up this evening. Thank you all for hanging in there. There's some really great information out there, and thank you again to our study volunteers. Let's give them another round of applause.
One of the things that we pride ourselves on at CISCRP, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, is that medical heroes are found in everyday places. And this is the portion of the program where we really want to recognize those medical heroes. So without our study volunteers, our research community would not find the new therapies that we seek. At CISCRP, we've made it a tradition to recognize clinical trials volunteers as medical heroes, as noted up here on our banners. And to help me recognize the medical heroes right here in our audience tonight, I would love for our national sponsor companies to step forward. And Brian, Estelle, and Mary Ellen, if you would join me right up here at the front of the podium. Please join me with a warm welcome for EMD Serrano, everyone. Earlier this evening, I did ask everyone in the audience if you'd participated in a clinical trial. And if you've participated, would you kindly raise your hand again for me? Wonderful. Now, those of you raising your hand, please come forward. We do want to thank you again today. And Brian, Estelle, and Mary Ellen do have up here copies at either end of the Stage of the Gift of Participation. This is a wonderful book I've enjoyed reading, and I believe that we have the second edition here, written by our founder of our organization, Kenneth Getz. And Brian, Estelle, and Mary Ellen are going to help me in handing copies of this book out to you. So those of you who have participated in a clinical trial, please do come up here to the podium and either end of the stage and get your free copy of the Gift of Participation. And the rest of you, please join me in giving them a hearty round of applause. Without each of you participating in clinical trials, none of us would know that the therapies, the flu vaccines, the over-the-counter medicines that we take are safe for every single one of us. Thank you to each and every one of you.